Okay, this is episode 6 of Esports Salon, and I'm Thorin, the usual moderator, not really as much of a host or people giving input on this show. That's what I tell people. If I want to, I just give my own opinions. So, okay, we'll go from in clockwise direction here around the overlay. So in the top right, he's actually even themed his webcam setup just to represent the colours of his team. It's actually Cloud9 Jack, a new attendee to the show. The other ones try to get involved in everything, even though a lot of times it's not even anything to do with them, but the others always somehow get involved. I don't know how that is. Mainly because they all, if you've noticed, everyone, I'm not really smart enough to sit around and reverse engineer a great conversation. I just wait until other people are having a great conversation on Twitter, and then I say, can I make money off that, please? I mean, host a conversation. I'd be really interested. And then I get people on the show and host a really good yeah, that's right. And so Jack is obviously owner of Cloud9, long-time LCS veteran, and then we keep going around the circle. We've got in the bottom right-hand corner, MonteCristo. Used to own a team called Renegades. We're not going to talk about that, though, because, present company included, could get awkward. So let's just pretend that was all fine. That's his experience, though. That like shows,
I'm pretty sure it ended okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're at least still around, so you landed on your feet. So, and then the last member of this episode is obviously Noah Whinston, who actually doesn't have an alias, bizarrely, but...
What was your gamer ID?
No, that's the thing, though, because most people pick their alias when they're like 13, but he actually started owning Immortals a year before that, so he never had a chance to.
My tag was IP Millionaire.
Oh God!
Are you being sarcastic right now?
I'm not.
That's worse than it. That would have been a bad joke, but it's actually real. That's the worst part.
It is real.
Okay. Well, and obviously CEO, co-founder of Immortals. So the discussion that I saw going on Twitter started as a result of TSM not managing to go far in MSI, which then it's this usual kicking off point for people to have discussion, which often happens after Worlds as well, of like, what should we change in the Western regions? How do you make the regions more competitive? How do you advance, etc.? And there was a lot of some dead ends, but some interesting areas that the discussion went down. So I want to just start briefly and go around. As far as I can tell, everyone in this conversation right now, not me obviously, is in favor of franchising, right, Jack? You are in favor of franchising?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you give me a basic reason as to why?
I think it is a good thing for the future of the LCS.
Okay, Monty.
And every esport.
This one's going to be limited to League of Legends. So, Monty, in the past, I don't think you were originally in favor of it, right? But you are just in favor of it as an inevitability. Isn't that your position?
I mean, I like it for certain reasons, and I dislike it for other reasons. Obviously, I think the most compelling argument against franchising is that it makes the end of the season for lower tier teams much more exciting because they actually are playing for something instead of tanking for draft picks or anything like that, like we see in traditional American sports. So, but on the other hand, I think that it is an inevitability because that's what everybody who owns the teams wants. And actually, I think most of the developers want it as well, because that way they can lock in a set of their chosen owners without having to deal with, I'm a great example about why franchising could exist, because Riot didn't want to deal with my crap, so they got rid of me. And it would be much harder to do that, obviously, with franchising, or for me to even get in the league in the first place. So I think that with the ability to select owners, they can take people who meet their credentials and also just sort of stabilize sponsorships as well. Because I think, as these guys can tell you, one of the major things about LCS is people are afraid of investing too much money, sponsors, even the owners for salaries and stuff, because you never know whether you're going to just get knocked out and all your investment is going to go to shit, because there's basically no parachute system at all.
Okay, and Noah, do you have any other reasons aside from the ones they've listed that you want to highlight at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what I care a lot about is building for the long term, right? Being able to develop talent over a longer time span, being able to develop a fan base over a longer time span, and that's really hard to do if every single split is effectively a fight for survival. Really hard to take risks on rookies if when a risk goes bad, you get knocked out of the league.
Okay. So one area that I thought was quite interesting in the discussion on Twitter was the idea of like whether there actually should be region locking and to what extent it should exist, because it was pretty clear, Noah, that you were in favor of basically what they have in LCS now. Well, like, would you like a more extreme one than it is now, or are you fine with it just being like 2 import slots you have? What's your take on it?
I think with the current global ecosystem where you do have a world championships where regions compete against each other, I don't think it would make sense to try and walk back to even stricter region locking, but I certainly wouldn't be in favor of less severe region locking. And I'm even a little bit nervous about what happens once kind of the original crop of Korean players hit their 4-year mark and become North American residents.
So let's talk about this, because I think it's any conversation about region locking for me has to go back to when and why region locking occurred in the first place. Because when and why it occurred in the first place was mostly to prevent China, who had by far the most money, basically ransacking Korea at the time, because most Korean players were not going to go to NA or EU for salaries that those teams were capable of offering when region locking was first implemented, 3 years ago? So, but now there is a lot more money overall spread across the scene. Obviously, we know SK Telecom's paying their players extremely well. Otherwise, they could probably still go make more money in China, even with the region locking policies. And there's a lot more money in NA and EU. So I don't think we'd be in a situation where literally all of the Korean players would just go to China right now. Now, many of them would probably leave, but they'd be more evenly spread out across the globe. So I do think that now is a feasible time to drop region locking in League of Legends. And I'm actually really happy that Overwatch League is not going to start with region locking in the first place.
Okay, when you say that, you mean outright drop it, like no region locking of any kind?
Yes.
Okay, so Jack, before we just get into the abstract of what you think is a general principle, you are someone who obviously essentially literally was a victim of region locking, because you had planned it out so that you could have had Jensen, Rush and Impact potentially on the same team, and you got Impact, and that was exactly when they changed the residency rules so that you had to pick between Impact and Rush, basically. So aside from that, like, where does your thought come from on why you want less region locking, or and what is your kind of ideal for it? Is it as extreme as Monty? You want just no region locking whatsoever?
Yeah, I don't think there should be region locking. I don't really ascribe to the ideas of building walls to artificially try to hold up your regions like players. I feel that if you actually bring in the top talent and that the top talent is playing against your local players, that'll actually allow those local players to get exposure to the best play when they're playing solo queue and smaller events, then that'll actually rise up their ability to actually compete on a global level. Because right now, all you're doing is just securing a local regional event with lots of North Americans, but when they go internationally, they're going to get crushed. And so what are we actually achieving? Like, to build a local team that's not very good, that looks good locally, gets smashed internationally, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking to build a team that can compete globally.
Okay, so Noah, why aren't you in favor of Jack's approach here? Like, it seems like when you were even arguing on Twitter, you never said that like you think it would make the quality worse or any of these factors. You mainly tended to argue from like fan base element, but put it this way, on the pure concept of would this actually get NA, for example, closer to Korea, would less region locking do so?
I mean, yeah, if that's the way you want to frame the debate, absolutely, right? You're opening up the possibility to take more players from Korea, which not only makes you stronger, it weakens Korea. So that could certainly achieve that end. I just disagree with like the core values behind Jack's and I guess Monty's argument. Okay,
so like what?
I mean, I try and think about the health of the league holistically, right? My goal for the LCS is not how can we create the single best competitive team possible, right? My goal for the LCS is how do we build a potentially generational base of fandom for an esports title. And the way you do that is not necessarily creating a really strong team that can make top 4 or top 2 at Worlds. The way you do that is by creating narratives and storylines and players that people want to follow. And as much as the hardcore LCS fans might appreciate Korean players, casual LCS fans are always going to find it more approachable to look at an English-speaking player or look at an American player instead of looking at a Korean player who doesn't really speak the language, doesn't have a history in the region, and it's just showing up to play.
I can't disagree with that anymore. I mean,
Yeah, just tell us.
literally, because what's going on, like with my players that I have in my house, I'm working on 3 green cards right now. These players are going to become, their goal is to become integrated with our society. And so it's not like we're taking away jobs like from folks that are local here. We're actually just bringing the top quality people to become local residents. And I believe generationally, I mean, right now I'm seeing them getting amazing fans and they're learning English and they've got a huge following with my players. And that's going to continue. I still see, parents showing up to LCS games with their kid in a C9 onesie. I mean, that's still happening. So really all we're doing is we're taking that extraordinary talent that's outside of the United States, bringing them in, integrating them into our society, and we're the stronger for it. And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's how America was built. And I think we should be continuing that trend.
I disagree with this because I think that it's looking at the wrong issue. Because right now, I think, Noah, your point is that you're arguing that the players themselves are the main draws for the fans. But one of the reasons why I'm in such heavy support of what Overwatch League is doing with localizing fan bases is that you can have a bunch of guys, on a Major League Baseball team who don't speak very good English, whether they're from the Dominican Republic or Cuba or other Caribbean countries, Japan, Korea, who all play for the same team. And I think the hook that you want to build these storylines and build these traditions is actually better represented by taking control of a region and then tapping into that as the sticking point and the tying point for a fan base, rather than players who, it sucks when you have players like that in esports because you can lose them instantly and then all the fans go with them, right? So I think that's like your idea is correct in the short term, but like in the long term, I think that's why regionalization is so important.
See, first off, I want to say that I'm definitely not making this argument from sort of like an ethical or moral point of view, right? I'm not going all Donald Trump protectivism on this. This is more about the efficacy of creating a healthy league for League of Legends or for any esport, if we're going to talk about Overwatch in this too. So from my perspective, Jack, you're right. Like the most engaged Cloud9 fans are always going to be the most engaged Cloud9 fans. That's 100% true. But you have no way of knowing the impact that Impact has on fans that aren't super engaged with Cloud9 or fans that aren't super engaged with LCS. To be honest, if Impact spoke English and was American and had his historically impressive career and was as good as he is today, he'd have a lot more than the few hundred viewers he gets whenever he goes live on Twitch.
Okay, let me ask you this then, Noah. So is your argument actually not based in this moment right now? Because obviously, as soon as you say that, the first thing I think is, yeah, but the whole reason why Impact plays for Cloud9 is because there isn't someone who's from North America who was that, well, I mean, in theory, people could say Horton now, but not back when he originally came in the league, There wasn't someone who was in that position who could have all these ideals and then just speak English and be North American as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to try and clarify, when I talk about Impact having a really impressive career, I'm talking not just from the perspective of he has a world championship medal, but from the perspective of there are these storylines and narratives that are built around him, right? He has this reputation. He has a current level of play that is undeniable. So, I mean, while winning a world championship is a big part of that, it's not the only part of that.
I think I want to just review a point that's come up a couple of times. Impact doesn't get a lot of viewers. Impact doesn't get a lot of Twitch followers. That's really because Impact doesn't make Twitch streaming a focus of what he does, and he doesn't really focus very much on Twitter. But if you want to go down that examples that are completely different, go look at Rush. Rush has massive Twitch following when he was streaming. If you look at Ray just started streaming. He's getting 2,000 to 3,000 people when he's streaming, and so the fandom is there. There's crazy fans that are following these guys, and if Rush was to come back, he'd be the top of Twitch. I guarantee it. Right now, he's doing other things. So you gotta be careful if you look at that as the reason. Well, oh look, he doesn't get very much people when he streams. It's because he doesn't stream, and it doesn't make it.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, neither of us can ever prove a counterfactual, right? I'm trying to say that Impact would have more viewers if he spoke fluent English and was born in America. You're trying to say that Rush, by virtue of, or theoretically Rush, by virtue of being an international talent, gets more attention on him. Neither of us can prove these points. So from a more theoretical perspective, then. The thing that makes esports engaging for fans is being able to have a really small barrier between you and the player, right? Fans love being able to watch their players practice, watch their favorite players, tweet to each other, be able to interact with them at every given possibility. And speaking a different language and not necessarily speaking the best English or not speaking any English and not coming from the same cultural background is inherently a barrier. And I'm not saying that that's unworkable. I'm not saying that that's like awful or morally wrong. I'm just saying that if your goal is to grow a league, your goal should be able to you should be able to increase the amount of engagement between the fans and the players. And if you bring over an LMQ who speaks almost no English, they all speak Chinese to each other, or you bring over an entire Korean team like Samsung Red was supposed to be. There are massive barriers between the players and the fans, and I can speak to that because I have a Brazilian Counter-Strike team. And I see how difficult it is to bridge the gap between North American fans and the Brazilian Counter-Strike team.
Okay, let me just put a pin in that, because actually I'll come back to the idea of being of a whole 5 team, because that's quite an extreme example. But I just want to ask you a real question from your current LCS team and the previous iterations. So even though you've just admitted that you obviously have a Brazilian CSGO team, and when someone asked you about this on Twitter, you essentially said, well, obviously, if that is the way the rules are played, then there's no restrictions, then yeah, I'm gonna like, play by whatever the rules currently are.
Yeah, hell yeah.
When it comes to the last LCS teams you had, though, the ones where you had Huni and you had Rainover, right? Pobelter, Adrian, Welter, these are all North American-born players who speak English, and they were in teams that were incredibly dominant domestically. I mean, they didn't win the LCS, sure, but for the rest of the time, they were very successful. Well, I mean, without telling us the literal numbers, was it comparable? Like, was Pobelter as popular as Huni? Did he have the same kind of engagement? What was that like on that end?
Pobelter and Wild Turtle were vastly more popular than Huni and Rainover.
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Is like Huni and Rainover world-class talents, right? Rainover, unfortunately, hasn't been showing it on his current team, but Huni is looking like one of the best top laners in the world for SKT.
That's interesting.
But from my perspective, again, like that's a really hard point to prove, right? Like Huni and Wild Turtle are not replaceable people, right? Like you can't template them and slot one in and the other and try and figure out whether one would be more popular if they were foreign or one would be more popular if they were domestic. So
did that actually contribute though to why you've come to this conclusion, or is this just a happy coincidence?
It's more just a happy coincidence, but I've seen it in a lot of places, right? Like Huni has one of the best personalities that a pro player can have, speaks great English, is incredibly entertaining, and still was not getting the type of engagement that I would expect to see. Right? It's not a knock on him. I still love him as a player, and he was a great player for our team. But ultimately, I think, and this is something that comes from my experience across other games too, not just League of Legends, it's really hard to kind of bridge that gap a lot of the time, especially when there are kind of paths of less resistance there, right? If I have the choice to root for Flame, who doesn't speak a ton of English but is super friendly and has a great personality, or I have the choice to root for Haunser, who I share more of a cultural background with. It's not an easy choice, but it is a lot easier for me to connect to the one that shares a cultural background with me.
Okay. Does anyone concede that? Do you think so, Jack? Is that reasonable?
No, I don't think it's reasonable. I mean, I understand where he's coming from, but I don't agree with it at all. I think the interaction rate that you're seeing is basically a product of the player putting time into building a fan base. If the player makes it, if he decides to go out there and stream like on a regular basis and promote himself, it doesn't matter like what language he speaks. If he's talented, people are going to watch. Ray, when he arrived, he hardly spoke English at all, like to Cloud9, and he just has been streaming consistently, and he's got a really nice following now on Twitch. And Wild Turtles has spent a ton of time streaming. He built up that fan base. He worked on it, and he was part of TSM. That's also part of the package of being a part of TSM. You get a massive following.
Actually, let me push back on you a little bit there, right?
Sure.
Jason actually hates stream. Like he doesn't like doing it.
He probably just didn't like doing it when you had him, but there was a time when I was managing him on TSM. He spent a lot of time.
Fair enough.
Not a bad salva.
So I think from my perspective...
So really, Jason just doesn't like you. That's what I'm getting at.
That is not what I was saying at all.
It's okay, Jack. It's fine.
No,
it's fine.
I don't want to give this man a complex.
We're never gonna be able to prove causality here, right?
Yeah.
Like we're never going to be able to narrow it down to those things, right? Someday spends a ton of time in North America trying to build fan base, speaking in English, streaming. His stream numbers are still not that great. Like for every example you can bring up, I can come up with a counterexample, and none of us are going to be able to sort out the external factors.
I mean, it also sometimes is a factor of the team you're on and how many fans are there, so that's will play into it.
I mean, if you have some master model to predict how many viewers someone will get when they go live,
I've had a lot of streamers with success, and I've seen that like the guys who put work into it. There was a time I remember like ages ago, and Sneaky was telling me, why even bother streaming? I'll never actually have a following like Dyrus. Like, what's the point? And at some point in his life, and I remember specifically when it was, he decided like, for the next month, I am just going to stream like 100+ hours and see what it does. And he got some pretty good following. He's like, wow, that was pretty good. I'll do it again. And it just grew like a snowball. So like he made the conscious decision that I'm gonna make this happen, and he did it. And I've seen it with Medius. Like when he puts in the time, his viewership grows like a big snowball. So it really is. I mean, they're both also very interesting people. So it's like if you're boring and you're on a team that nobody likes, then it's not going to work out well for you. But there is part of the personal effort that's a big part of it.
Monty, do you think? Because if Noah can give the extreme of like LMQ coming over with all Chinese or something like that, what about this? Because I want to know actually what everyone thinks of this, but I want to start with you so you can kind of get in again. So what if someone like TSM, so someone who had a really big fan base already, got enough, like they got 3 really good Koreans or 2 really good Koreans and a European, and it was enough imports that they actually could, I mean, it might be ridiculous to say win worlds, but let's say be a very significant contender and do a lot of damage at these tournaments. Would that be enough to overcome any of this like lack of natural fan engagement? Do you think? What is your sense for that?
I think if we're talking about TSM that does a better job of helping out their players with the branding and is already significantly popular, then yes, they could. I think the LMQ example is a bit disingenuous because, like Jack is saying, it does depend on effort. And LMQ basically had fuck all effort going into their branding. It didn't even really seem like the owner cared about their success in America. They were sort of just sitting there, not really reaching out to the community or doing much of anything at all. So besides just playing in the LCS. So I think they did a particularly bad job of even trying to build a fan base for themselves. And I also say this with the perspective that I have no idea how popular they were in China. And I think that's another thing we have to look over here is this is a globalized esport. And I think that, for example, if you saw some of the Korean stars coming over to North America, who already have established Korean fan bases, like an example I could use for Overwatch is Lunatic High, who's the most popular team. If they moved as a unit onto an Overwatch League team, maybe they wouldn't be as popular in America, but their stream numbers, which are already super good, would be, translated over to it would still be the same Korean audience, but they would just be streaming from North America instead. And so you have to find ways to market to the local audiences that your players are from, as I'm sure Noah knows with his all Brazilian Counter-Strike team.
Mm-hmm. I do think that I have maybe one example that kind of can trump the others of a real.
Okay, come on.
So China, right?
Right.
Basically, the reason that region locking was implemented in the first place, the first region to bring over Koreans from Korea, I believe. In China, as much as the streaming platforms have exploded, in the last year or 2 years, Chinese streaming platforms have actually stopped acquiring content from non-Chinese sources.
Okay.
Generally, Korean players are no longer the really highly valued commodities among Chinese streaming platforms that they used to be, even no matter how famous they are, right? Yeah. Even ones on top Chinese teams have difficulty for it. If it truly didn't matter, the culture or the language that a player spoke, if it only mattered on performance, then that type of behavior would be irrational, right? Like EasyHoon, being a great player, should have a ton of viewers, never mind the fact that VG wasn't performing so well,
sure, yeah.
Right? But, I mean, it's the job of these Chinese streaming platforms to cater to what the audiences want. And at least in China, I'm not claiming it's the same for every audience, and certainly American culture is much different than Chinese culture. At least in China, the audience there has expressed a preference for Chinese language, Chinese culture content.
I mean, as far as I know, I think you are
I think
actually
that's
correct there. Like, as far as I know, it's still the old like World Elite players that are still the most popular ones. You know, basically the most famous Chinese players.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. There's also the argument, like, I've heard obviously the same things you've heard about the contracts being smaller for Korean players as a result of this. But I also think if you look at it, perhaps the preference is there for a more Chinese-based audience, because perhaps a lot of their viewers are, China's just starting to open up in terms of globalization. So they may not just have the same kind of, I would say, attitude towards supporting people from outside of China, because maybe some of these people haven't ever been outside of China before, for example. Whereas I think in the West, we're so used to watching in traditional sports all these players from outside our America come and play, whether they're Europeans or Asian players or wherever, because we have these top tier leagues. And so that's a little bit, I think people are more accustomed to that in the West. So maybe that'll change with time in China.
I think also there's just some business reasons for these streaming platforms to not invest so much in streamers. Because
they were investing way too much money.
Yeah, well, there was like we've seen in like a lot of other sponsors, like the G2A Kingwin days, they were just dumping money into streamers because they were just competing over each other to see who could represent their brand. It's something similar like that was going on with the streaming platforms in China. There was a bunch of platforms all fighting for the business, and so it was just like, a financial race to see who could spend more money. And I think they're gobbling each other up, and they're realizing we don't need to spend like that on players to get what we want.
And you're right about that, but to be fair, the decrease is disproportionate. Right, Korean players have seen their contract value drop a lot faster than Chinese have.
So, okay, I've got a question for you though, Noah. All of your arguments account very well when it's a Korean or a Chinese player, but what about a European that already speaks English?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very different scenario.
Should that be a different type of import slot, do you think?
I mean, I think it's to different degrees. I'm certainly not a league commissioner, so I'm not going to legislate this, but from my perspective, like, the barrier between someone from Denmark and someone from the United States is a lot smaller than the barrier between someone from Korea and someone from the United States. They probably speak the same language. They have a more equivalent cultural background, even though obviously it's different. So if I am forced to legislate like a league commissioner, like, maybe I'd advocate for treating Western imports differently from Eastern imports, but also at the same time, I still don't really buy the argument about why having imports is super important to fan engagement long term, right? Like, I buy that it makes teams better on a global scale. I don't necessarily buy that, like, being able to import more Europeans keeps North American fans engaged with League of Legends.
Mm-hmm. What about fans who just get constantly disappointed by the performance of North American teams and maybe get just stop being interested in watching NA LCS, or because they're so limited, they do so poorly on international stage, they just lose interest? I mean, how does that factor in?
I mean, that's a point of view. Neither you or I is going to be able to prove whether or not that happens, right? Maybe Riot can, but we can't. I would say that North American international performances have been on the decline over the years, whereas North American viewership has been on an incline. So I'm not seeing the correlation.
Okay. So the thing is, though, we basically, even though everyone was against you, Noah, I did let you chart the framing of the discussion by the fact that you made the ultimate criteria is to grow fan engagement. Like, that's what you state as the goal of LCS, essentially. And obviously, franchising plays into that very heavily, because people think if you have the same teams around, that will have the result. So another approach within franchising, which I saw you guys discussing on Twitter, was whether it will improve the league in terms of like developing new talent. So before we go entirely into that aspect, I want to ask, because Jack had a comment that I thought was very interesting, which is that he actually thinks that there's another reason why he wants no region locking. Because as he kind of alluded to very briefly, he thinks if you bring over the really good players, that actually if there were like native NA talents, for example, that by being able to play against these guys before they're even on a top team, presumably, that would somehow like fast track them up. Is that the basic premise, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, you're as good as your competition, and I think one of the things that actually hurts our NA teams a lot is that we're playing just against other NA teams, so we're not learning as fast as we can, and that's why when I have the opportunity to, I take my team and I push it out to Korea, and they play against the Korean teams, and we get really, we play really well, and it's really sad because we bring them back, the meta changes it all, we're suddenly playing teams that are subpar, and we've lost it. And so, by that same token, our solo queue is not as high quality as a Korean solo queue. And if you bring that top talent out here, you're just going to be playing against better players, which will push you to be better.
Right, and I agree, because even in the solo queue environment, you have to remember that most of these guys are playing against the same several hundred players, right? So if you import another 60 or 70 professional players to come play in a region, and because the other reason is because these teams tend to scrim during the same blocks every day. So, which means that those scrim blocks are not going to have most of the professional players playing solo queue during them, which means that in the off hours of scrims, basically you're going to be super loading high-end solo queue with a lot more talent. There are just times of day when solo queue is full of professional players and times when it's not, just because they've got to do their organized practices. So I do think it really does help out with high-end solo queue for sure.
My players have complained if, like, for say some reason, like a scrim block gets canceled, and so they go play solo queue while they're waiting to, for the scrim block to resume, that the quality of the solo queue when the pros are not playing is abysmal. And so it's absolutely true.
Now, Noah, are you actually against that principle? It sounded like you were.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few points there, right? One is I absolutely think having Korean players, or I guess just more talented players, I won't even call it necessarily Korean players, but being able to import means you have more talented players in North America because there are no limitations on that. I think having more talented players in North America means that the North American players that can keep their spots will get better. I think we're kind of ignoring the fact that if you bring over, let's say, 20 more Korean players than currently exist, that's half the players in LCS. So what happens to all the North American players that no longer have teams and no longer play professionally, especially in a post-franchising world where there's no more challenger? So yeah, it'll make teams overall better on a global scale. It'll probably make the North American players that can keep their spots better. Doesn't really account for the kind of dead zone of talent that gets created when you import that many. Doesn't really account for what happens if the problem with solo queue is not actually skill-based. What happens if it's cultural, right? Because when my players talk to me about Korean solo queue, it's not just Korean players have better mechanics, it's Korean players take solo queue more seriously. Or Korean players kind of know when the game is lost in solo queue, so you can get in a lot more games because people will just surrender. But if those Korean players come to the United States and they adapt a North American cultural mindset, because there's 20 of them compared to 200 people in Challenger, does their higher level of mechanical skill actually impact solo queue play enough? I don't think it's mechanics like necessarily that are keeping Korea above everybody else.
No, but the more people you load into that challenger tier who are skilled players or who have that mentality will shape the mentality that other people take within that high level of solo queue.
So let's say you bring in 50 players, you just replaced every single North American player in LCS.
Yeah,
if you actually bring over 60 to 70 Korean players, there are no more slots left for North Americans. And then no matter how good you get in solo queue, how do you break into a team that's already speaking full Korean? Like, I know this, again, Counter-Strike team example here, right? My players are Brazilian. They all speak Portuguese. They do their communications in Portuguese. Even if there was a fantastic talent available that spoke English, do you think that would fit within our team? Of course not.
I mean, I don't think there's an eventuality where every team is a full Korean team in NA, so I don't think it's as extreme as you can paint it, right? There will still be teams that are trying to pick up that North American talent, whether, because they want to have an English-speaking team and they have enough other players, so therefore by farming more talent within the solo queue system, you're going to get a few American players that are way better.
I actually think as you reduce import restrictions, you stratify teams. Like, once you have the third Korean import, your incentives to pick up a fourth and a fifth are way higher. Whereas if you have 3 North American players and all the North American talent is available because they all got dropped for Koreans, it's definitely much more in your incentives to pick up 5 North American players. So I think what you would end up seeing are teams that have 4 or 5 Korean players, or 4 or 5 Chinese players, or 4 or 5 European players, and teams that had 4 or 5 North American players. But again, important to remember is like the North American players.
So it's basically Counter-Strike.
Yeah, I think it ends up a lot more like Counter-Strike. Except we also have this entire pool of North American players that get kicked off their teams because there are new imports coming in who don't get the chance to play professionally anymore. So the ones that stick around, I'm sure, will be better. The rest, what happens to them?
Okay. Jack, let me ask you this then. If what Noah's saying, if you disagree in general in terms of like the import slot thing, okay, well, I gave the example earlier of where you might have wanted to use essentially 3 import slots, but really because one of them was going to become a resident, in fact, Impact would be able to just play as a non-import. Well, what about if someone said to you, well, the only reason you have contracts now is because the import slot exists, and so this guy got a chance, and he got a chance in a top team, and perhaps he'll be a future star of NA LCS. Is there anything to this?
How much do I want to talk about this stuff? So a lot of it is, it's not like really slot related. Like there were the reason I went through the jungler changes I went through really, to be honest, like Rush's time at Cloud9 was done. And I wasn't going to be going for the super team. That would have been a cool thing, but that wasn't really what was going on there. There was just a synergy issues between the players that wasn't working. And so we went with Meteos, and we again, it wasn't working out that we needed it to be, and we brought in Contracts, and Contracts seems to be he had the right mentality to fit for Cloud9. So
what about Smoothie then? He's another player that's fairly young in LCS, became a star on your team potentially at his position.
Let's think.
Let's talk about some of the top laners. How about Haunter and Lorlo? Both of whom are incredibly valuable because they're rare North American top lane talents.
Yeah, I feel that I would be looking for the best fit as a player. I will be looking for talent alone on talent when I'm looking to recruit. If I didn't have like the restrictions that I currently have, I would be looking for who's the best fit. We do tryouts to see how it go. Yes, someone might be mechanically more gifted, but if they're a better teammate, then they'll probably have a leg up with me. So there's a lot more than just mechanical skill. Language does go into it, but also teamwork ethics in general. And if I was to not have the import restrictions that I have now, I would just be building a team that functions well. And I think that's the way I personally think that's the way it should be. I don't feel like anyone should, because they're born in North America, should get a free pass to play LCS. I think that's just the wrong way of thinking, and it actually holds us back. So yeah, it's possible that Smoothie may have never made my team. It's possible that Contracts may have never made my team. But Contracts in particular was a rising star, and he was identified early on. I'd wanted to be on Cloud9 for a while before I picked him up. So there's a good chance I could have picked him up. His mentality is perfect for what I need on my team. So really, I would love it when I'm assessing talent that I'm just purely basing on, is this the right talent and fit for my team, and not, do you have the right passport?
Okay. Monty, I don't know if you've seen any of my videos where I've talked about Dardoch, but one of the things I always stress is that in theory, I mean, apparently people are correct actually, since Bjergsen's like a non-resident now, in theory he should be the most valuable player, but I always said Dardoch in theory is the most valuable player in LCS because he's a jungler, which if you notice, there's not that many that are NA born, and he's a potential star player, but he's from NA, so you can essentially have 2 import players and Dardoch. So well, the key way I always frame it is, in a mad way, that does almost make up for any kind of like team problems he's been having so far. Because everyone figures if they're the one who solves that problem one day, then they've locked out in like all these areas that you can get him in, right?
Apparently not, Noah. Is that a solvable problem?
Apparently not so far.
I mean, look. Like,
okay,
Duncan, I will back you up on many of the good things you've said about Josh, right? Like, he is an incredible talent. If anybody figures out how to integrate him well into a team environment, he is going to be one of the best players of all time across any region, right? I just don't think we could do it.
Sure.
Like
so,
that's why we made the move.
So here's the question, though, Monty. In a world where you're the person who's the second or the third team for Dardoch, and there's no restrictions actually. So let's say he got in the league the same way. You know, it was an emergency scenario. The main team wasn't doing well. They brought in the rookies. They gave him a try. It worked out initially, you know. Then later on, there's problems in the lineup. They're thinking of changing people. In this scenario, wouldn't it just be a lot easier to say, well, actually, all those value things I've added there don't exist anymore because there's no import restrictions. So just get someone from Europe that's as good as him, or get someone who's not quite as good but has a lot of other qualities. But you know, got a wider talent.
But this is one of those issues, right? Where Dardoch, with his apparent attitude problems, is being propped up simply because of his citizenship, whereas if he had to work harder or wasn't so valuable and he could just get cut from a team at any time, maybe he would be treating things differently or changing his attitude issues. So I think that's sort of a weird argument to make, so because you never know if he would be more motivated under the scenarios where he was more likely to get cut from a team and not immediately picked up by another one.
Okay.
I mean, let me distill this down a little bit, right? Duncan, effectively what you're saying is your point is if you are born with the right passport, you get like extra bonus points when it comes to how valuable you are to a team. Right now, yes, 100% true. Yeah. Like, there is no debate that is the way it currently works.
Do you have a rebuttal then to Monty's point that even though you give essentially you give value to a team, in a way, doesn't that also like the disconnect here seems to be that Monty seems to have made a decent argument there that means you don't have to actually be as good.
I mean, yeah, like that's if we removed import restrictions, a lot of North American players would no longer be on LCS teams because there are better players available in other regions. But again, I feel like we've lost sight of the value framing of this debate, right? We're not asking how do we create the strongest possible North American teams. Because if that was the question, we should remove all import restrictions. 100%. There's no doubt about it. Right?
Okay, but presumably you don't want every single import gone. You haven't said that, which would give you your ultimate league where everyone's from NA. So you don't want that yourself. So there's got to be a middle ground.
I mean, there's shades of grey, but you can't define what the exact shade of grey is.
How do you have the engagement and also get better NA players? Is there a way within this framework that makes sense? Do you have an argument for it?
I mean, these two things move proportionally to each other, right? Like if you increase the amount of engagement by reducing import restrictions, you also end up with more NA players and a weaker overall North American ecosystem. If you reduce the level of import restrictions, you end up with more imports, less engagement, but stronger teams, right?
Okay, then there is
no facts-based model to determine which of these is best.
Yeah. So then this is the one thing I'm a bit confused on. Why don't you go the other way and just say, I don't want any imports? Let me have only 5 NA players, because you know what? Let's make NA its own little bubble. It'll be the most successful bubble ever, and we'll max the profits. And you know what? We're never doing that well at internationally anyway, so let's just make it all. Let's have 5 haunters on every team.
Because unlike some people.
Wait a minute. Why is he squirming right now? Where are you going right now? Where are you going right now? That doesn't make sense. That's your own abstract. Come on.
I mean, look. The reason
he's only partially greedy. He's only partially greedy. You see.
I mean, I just think that there is a point where that doesn't make sense anymore, right? Like, I'm not completely disagreeing with Jack.
Okay.
Right. I do think at some level, if North America would just become a wild card region where we were actually worse than Brazil and all the other wild card regions in the world.
Almost worse than Vietnam this time, dude.
Almost. I do think
that was pretty close.
TSM is only using 1 import slot, so
okay.
But I do think that there is a point at which North America's weakness on an international scale starts negatively affecting fandom, right? Absolutely. I think it's a lot harder to kind of support your favorite player if you know your favorite player can't even come close to comparing with other players in other regions. It's tough. On the other hand, I think we do still see a ton of fanatical fandom in Brazil. We see a ton of fandom in Turkey. We see a ton of fandom in Vietnam. All wildcard regions that have not performed well on an international stage in the past. So I don't think that that's the single most determining factor of fandom. I also don't think shared language and culture is the single most determining factor of fandom. I don't think competitive results are the most single determining factor of fandom. I don't know what affects fandom the most. None of us have facts to back these up, right? We're just making assumptions and then trying to back them up with logic that doesn't actually have any sources behind it. So from my perspective...
But again, I just think that you can accomplish both of the things you want by regionalizing teams. I think that's the hook. Because the constant question is, What you want, Noah, is to hook the largest number of fans that you can. You want to create the largest fan base for your team and for whatever esports that you're associated in.
Largest and most engaged, but yes.
Yes. But the best way to do that, and the way traditional sports solve this problem, is that they became less, not more, less reliant on the players and the personalities that they had, because they became part of a geographic landscape that people would, they tap in. So here's the problem. Esports are not tapping into what is basically a human evolutionary behavior, which is tribal culture, okay? And it has to do with the culture of where you're from and the landscape around you and your feeling of belonging in a specific location, which is just hardwired into people's brains. So basically, the problem is that esports teams exist in this sort of like nebulous space where you lost a lot of fans, when certain players leave your roster or they go to a different roster, or you gain fans, maybe when like a guy with a lot of fans like Wild Turtle, comes to Immortals, and maybe you lost some when he sort of went back to TSM. Like, I don't know, specifically in your case. But the point is that you have nothing about Immortals. If you lost all of your league players, serious question. If you lost every single league player on your roster and you replaced them all with rookies or players who didn't have a large fan base, how many Immortals fans would you have?
I'd say 15%.
Okay. So here's the other issue. I'm a professional sports fan. I have seen on my favorite team, the Denver Broncos, I have seen literally every fucking player on that roster leave the team in my lifetime. And I'm still a fan of that team, even though it has entirely changed.
Yeah, I mean, look,
that's
you're advocating.
That's what you should be striving for, and this is how professional sports have overcome this problem. The problem itself is stupid because esports teams do not have regionalized ties.
See, I call bullshit. Okay, go ahead, Jack.
There's a couple of things on that. Like, Monty's really right in that you're looking to build like generational fans, and you're looking to have like a brand that even though when the players leave, they still love it. Cloud9's like replaced most of our LCS team at this point, like 80% of our team, and we still have more fans than ever before. And I think a big part of that, like, yes, I think having local fans would be freaking awesome, and it'd be an addition to what we have. But I think also part of that is because Cloud9 has been around for a while, and over time we've become a mainstay of esports. And I think one of the big problems, and this is kind of going back to franchising, is what's happened like in Europe. It's just under our current system, there's no safety. But for some reason, NA teams have survived year in, year out. If you look at the teams that were here at the beginning of LCS, it's almost the same teams that are now, or at least half of us. But you go to go to EU, there's only one team, Fnatic, that's actually stuck around. And I think what's happened is there's been such a shuffle in EU, fans were lost. Fans found a reason to stop being fans, and they didn't associate with a specific team. And I think that's why like NA viewership has gotten one of many reasons it's gotten stronger and stronger over the years, and that Cloud9 is able to switch players and still retain those fans because they were Cloud9 fans before these players came on, and they'll be Cloud9 fans after.
Okay. To be
Jack,
fair,
I've got a question.
Your most popular player is still on the roster.
No,
you still have
Monty.
Sneaky.
I've got a question though.
Sure.
Doesn't Cloud9 actually go against the principle Monty just said? Because if people are Cloud9 fans for the players, they should now be fans of FlyQuest, not Cloud9.
Yeah, and we know that, yes, FlyQuest does have a lot of fans, but there's still more fans for Cloud9.
What do you think the factor is?
I think it's because Cloud9, the brand, has been around for a long time. I also had like a unique situation where my players went off the main roster onto my challenger roster. So like there was a really nice kind of progression of them moving off the team. So it wasn't like immediate.
Okay.
Well, look, I'm not saying it's not possible to keep fans. I'm just saying it's a hell of a lot easier when you don't, this having a geographic location for decades makes it significantly easier to smooth over those changes. and make sure that you're not going to have a large drop off in fan base, right?
It allows the neighbors living next to each other. They go out to mow the yard. They can talk about the game last night for their local team. Like it definitely establishes like this really cool community tribal connection, and I think it could really actually enhance what Cloud9 has by having something like that.
And that's the only, this is another sidebar, but I think that's the only way, not the only way, but one of the easiest ways to start pushing more casual fans into becoming esports fans is to give them that tether, right? I think I've said this before, but I think there's a bunch of people who are sort of teetering on the brink of esports fandom where they sit there and they'll watch the odd event when it happens to be on or promoted by a developer very heavily. But I think that one thing that's keeping away a larger group of fans from coming in is the fact that there isn't a home team to support like they have with their traditional sports teams.
Yeah. And look, I love the idea of localization as a long-term fix to that problem. And Jack, you're right. Like Cloud9 is one of the few organizations that's fortunate enough to have a brand that is bigger than a lot of the players that play for you, right? Like you and TSM and maybe CLG are really the only 3 LCS brands that I think have accomplished that, right? I think everyone else is still trying to. But like we can't just say localize and then the fans will come. This isn't a build it and they will come moment, right? Like when you localize, you open up a Pandora's box of work you need to do to get people to come and engage. And how much easier is that to do if someone who's never watched esports before can come, watch an interview with someone who speaks their language, like interact at a fan signing with someone from the same cultural background as them, and see an aspirational life path by which they can potentially become pro if they practice hard enough, right? Like that doesn't happen if you have a team of 5 Koreans.
No, it can, especially it can. And one of the main reasons why it can is if you have a traditional sports owner from that same city who is buying a team and is going to promote them through the channels that already exist within their current city-based organizations.
I absolutely disagree with that, right? Okay. I do not think that in any way is like, and this is not an indictment of the model of some publishers that are pushing towards that, right? That is an indictment of that like philosophy. It is not in any way automatic, right? Like if you are part of a franchise league that is moving towards localization, that is not like your one-way meal ticket. That is a whole bunch of extra work you just subjected yourself to because
I'm not saying it's not extra work. I'm just saying that the fan bases can be tapped in ways already.
The fan bases can be tapped, but it is I don't know. I think I'm the only one here that actually has a full international roster in one of their games, right? Jack, I guess kind of.
Well, I did, team? But my team spoke English.
Do you have you're an Australian team. Okay, Monty. And Jack, you had your Danish Dota team until they recently disbanded, right? But I think I'm the only one here that has had a full foreign language speaking roster playing in North America, trying to build a North American fan base. And I can definitely say that despite the massive amount of effort that my guys put into social media, the massive amount of effort my guys put into streaming, it's still really hard to get North Americans to pay attention to Brazilian Counter-Strike players.
Do they get paid attention to by the Brazilians, though?
Yes, they have massive Brazilian engagement. They have more Twitter and Facebook followers than many well-established North American
Robin,
pros.
Get over here.
Just
audience. Come say hi to Monty.
Hi, Robin.
What up, fam? Are you in LA yet?
Yeah.
Holy shit, we gotta grab drinks sometime. I got some dank ass scotch in my room.
All right, I will come have some of your dank ass scotch. I didn't realize scotch could be dank, but I'm into it.
That's some weird ass scotch.
Noah, without trying to cheat back on the point you made about the Brazilian team, where if there isn't a restriction, if there are import slots allowed in a league or entire in slot, obviously you'll take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. Here's another part where I feel like your abstract point maybe falls down a bit. Am I naive in thinking if the logic is that by having great fan engagement, essentially what you're saying is you don't even have to win. You don't even have to be the best at the game. So why don't you already just go for an all-5 NA lineup in NA LCS, but just have the 7th best team?
Because I can get relegated.
No. Okay. So franchising comes in, mate. You don't have to worry about that. And then have the 7th best team, but get everyone on Twitch, get them all on Twitter.
The new Immortals.
Write the scripts for everything they're saying, and won't you just kill Jack? You'll be like, okay, Jack, yeah, well done, you came 3rd or whatever, mate, but your guy doesn't speak English, so I'm killing you in the metrics. Wouldn't that work?
So again, Duncan, I think you're erasing some of the shades of gray here, right?
That's
I
what
don't
I'm known to
advocate.
do. Okay.
It's true. I don't advocate for one extreme, which is not caring at all
Okay.
about winning, and I
Yeah,
don't
Immortals
advocate
is
for
the
the other
meme team.
extreme.
Immortals is the meme team. We're starting it now. Everybody
And I
accuses
don't
us of being
advocate-
only there for the memes.
God. For the other extreme, which is only caring about winning, right?
Okay.
But I would definitely say that in the scenario in which North American LCS becomes a bunch of teams that have 5 Korean players and a bunch of teams that have 5 North American players, I'm probably one of the guys that has 5 North American players. And I'll build the best possible team I can with that. And like, I probably won't have a team that'll dominate the league, but I'll do my best to get there. Because
Okay,
I think
so
that
Noah,
that's how you build sustainable fandom.
Then since you gave it like that is an extreme, obviously. But in this, wouldn't that actually be how we'd find out? Let's say tomorrow, right? I'll give you 2 things in once. I'll give you, Noah, tomorrow it's franchised. Everyone's got a spot and you can never lose your spot. But the thing I give to Jack is there's no restrictions. So now Jack goes out and then he's just said he's not going to literally make 5 Koreans. But in theory, he could. Okay, let's imagine a world in which he made 3 or 4 Koreans or whatever in his team.
Sure.
You're gonna make yours all 5 NA. Wouldn't that actually be the ultimate laboratory where you would beat him on all the other metrics, even if you didn't win? Or would that be too extreme?
Yeah, I mean that's a good laboratory, right? Like laboratory.
It is English, mate. But okay.
Yeah, I mean if that's a test case we can construct, I think that would be pretty good. It's hard to kind of create a good vacuum case for that to happen, but I mean also realistically, let's be real. Like adding the first non-Korean to a team of 4 other Koreans is incredibly difficult and probably wouldn't happen. Right, like even with some of the Korean players that we're talking about coming off of import status, I'm pretty sure the plan there was to build a team of all 5 Koreans, including 2 on import status and 3 that were becoming domestic non-imports. So in much the same way that it's hard to do with Brazilian Counter-Strike, in much the same way that it would be hard to do in a kind of a national Counter-Strike team or a national Dota team, it's really hard to swap up the language that your communications are in to accommodate a single foreign member. Again, like once you have 3 or 4 Koreans, the incentive to have a 5th is really, really high.
What do you think then? Because an earlier point that you made that everyone seemed to agree upon is that by being able, whether or not it's in NA or not, everyone seems to be in agreement that having Korean boot camps is a good thing and you can get benefit from this. So an old point Monty
except for Weldon, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as long as he just mutes himself, there's no problem. But in theory, if Korean boot camps are a good thing, what about this? If instead there is an LCS season and some sort of a tournament circuit, and people can both go and boot camp a lot in Korea and have an LCS in NA, is that any kind of a reasonable solution? Is it just too implausible?
I mean, that's okay, but again, let's be realistic about what Korean boot camps are for, right? Korean boot camps are meant to make your team better competitively. They are not meant to create fans. They are not meant to increase fan engagement. They are meant for a single purpose, and they do that purpose well. So yes, if our value system prioritizes being better competitively over everything else, that's a good idea.
But wait a minute, surely in yours that makes you better, and you have the same fans, though.
So what if
am I missing something? You not have the same fans by
I'm just saying that doesn't necessarily address my concerns.
Okay,
right? Like that definitely is better than just not Korean boot camping and not allowing any imports.
So as a different measure to increase competitiveness in NA, if the league were franchised and they were to cut out the spring split and give teams more time to compete internationally or to do boot camps in Korea to therefore better increase their skill, so you sort of lessen the burden or the amount of time that they have to exist in crappy American, shit competitive conditions. Is that something you'd be interested in, or would the spring split be too much of a blow to losing the spring split be too much of a blow to your fan base or your fan engagement?
Well,
what if you spent the entire spring split in Korea instead?
Here at Immortals, we're not too big fans of the spring regular season.
I don't think
not a lot of people here are, mate. Don't worry.
Look, like I would say that the danger you run into there is, I think, a lot of the same danger that you're seeing with Apex right now, right? Which is Apex, to be clear, the Overwatch tournament held by OGN in Korea, which is when you have your players international for large periods of time, especially on a vastly different time zone, it's really hard to maintain same levels of fan engagement. Like, especially when American teams, and Jack, you can speak to this, have gone over to Korea for long periods of time, it's a pretty big blow for the Overwatch fans that stay North America side, especially because a lot of them aren't going to tune into Apex unless they're the most dedicated ones. So occasional short tournaments, more like IEMs, yeah, that sounds great. 2 months where you're living on a Korean time zone and really not able to interact with your North American fans, that's not so great.
Okay, what do you think about this then, Jack? 'Cause I noticed you didn't jump on the idea of like, yeah, let's just get rid of one of the whole splits. And I mean, in theory, as far as I know about how you've run Cloud9, you want a lot of hours in front of exposure and people to be watching within your time zone. So where do you fall on this one?
I think it's an interesting idea, and I think it would definitely make us better if we were able to have some sort of competition where, like, if we were all in Korea, or if, maybe it was like almost like a road show. We took the best teams from the other regions and we're here in North America for a while playing. But any way we could actually have our players playing international talent more, I think would make Worlds a much more competitive event. And I would be for that. I think that would be great. There was a time that I potentially could have sent my LCS team to Korea for an event Monty invited me to, and I thought it was really cool. I was totally up for it, but it just didn't work out.
Okay. So Noah, what about that then? It doesn't have to just be Korea. Like, we bring the top 4 Korean teams, and we have the NA Spring Premier, and the top 4 teams from all 4 regions come, and it's like 6 weeks or something. Would that be more reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, look, Jack, this is an idea Jack and I kicked around, I think, before Season 6 Worlds that was held in North America, right? Trying to bring Korean teams here to boot camp instead of boot camping in Korea with Korean teams.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's objectively better for North American teams. Like, there's no reason why that's worse for us than going to Korea, except maybe the solo queue experience. So I take that back. Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, like, that kind of thing increases competitiveness at zero cost to your fan base engagement and at zero cost to your local fans. I can't think of a reason why that would be bad.
So, okay, then, if you're talking about franchising, the way that all came about last year, Jack, made it sound as though the fact that it was the owners who kept putting it public was like... It felt like the push was more from the owners. So if we're spitballing all these ideas, like, these all might sound great on paper, but do you think that are people like Riot even thinking in the same direction as this? Like, do they have the same concerns about building the same fan engagement and these aspects?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's key to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you're thinking about it critically, that you're going to see that if you have more stable teams where the fans can become true fans of those teams, that as the players recycle in and out, the fans still have a connection to the game and to those teams. So it's better for Riot Games, in my opinion. I don't know what their opinion is, but that's my opinion of their opinion.
Well, Jack, I think we've all been in those meetings, and they have not been fans of franchising previously, but
Why do you think that is, though,
are changing.
I mean, you made a point yourself as to why it would also be
because
they can choose not to have you involved.
Because yes, exactly. Because Riot has also never been a fan of being a partner with the teams. They like to control everything, and they haven't. If there was a franchising model, they would in some ways have to give up a certain level of control over the organizations, right? So they don't like doing that at all, ever, for any reason.
I think that's maybe a slightly unfair characterization, right? I think,
okay.
Reformulate it then, Noah. Come on.
I mean, I think as the ownership groups in North America have gotten more and more professional, there's less and less of a barrier for Riot to be okay with being true partners, right? Like, if you look at North America 3 years ago, there's no way in hell I would recommend franchising that. If I look at America 2 years ago, probably the same thing. If I look at North America now, I see 10 teams that are all in this for the long haul, have significant financial backing, and are operating at a high professional level. Like, if I'm Riot Games, of course I'm more okay franchising now than I was.
But there's no guarantee that those 10 teams are going to be franchised.
No, there's absolutely not. Like, and from my perspective, that seems reasonable, right? Like, there are a bunch of outside investors coming in, traditional sports teams coming in to this league and others. Maybe some of those will be better partners for Riot. If I'm Riot, I'm absolutely going to prioritize the people that I think are the best long-term for what I'm doing and the league. Right? And having a proven track record of working together with a brand like Cloud9 or a brand like TSM or a brand like Team Liquid, like, yeah, all of those brands are brands that if I were Riot, I would automatically include. Not only because I know they're good and professional, but because I have a track record of working with them. I think for the newer teams, the onus is on us to be able to prove that we deserve to be there, that we deliver enough value compared to traditional sports teams X.
So wait a minute. Yeah, I can understand why, if you're an Immortals and you know that you are going to be, in theory, a franchise team now, then yes, it would be good for you to be franchised. But what if tomorrow they say, you know what, Noah, we were listening and actually you made some really good points about franchising. We're going to start franchising tomorrow. Oh, and by the way, we've got these like NFL teams who want to put like 50 million in for a spot now. So do you have 50 million on your note? Because if not, I'm afraid, like, we actually think that they'll bring more engagement and more fans and stuff, and say, you're in favor of that, right? So you just give up your spot and then you can go play in, like, oh, there isn't a challenger, that's right, yeah. Just you go play Overwatch, mate. Like, that's okay.
I mean,
that achieves your end, right?
I have to, like, the points I'm advocating, the points all of us are advocating are from the perspective of what's best for the league, right? Like,
okay.
From the perspective of what's best for the league, I think a franchise system, something closer to what Overwatch is doing, right, is better than the current system of relegation. Okay. And like, I will say that if like an endemic team was offered a slot, that was just too expensive for them. There are a lot of routes to still be involved, right? Partnering up with larger traditional sports organizations, bringing endemic expertise that's very valuable to the table. But let's even take your extreme hypothetical, Duncan. Like, I have to advocate in this argument for the position that is best for the league. If I'm advocating for the position that's best for myself, like, I have 2 imports on my LCS team. I have 5 imports on my Counter-Strike team. I'm not going to advocate for the position that shoots me in the foot right now if I'm supposed to advocate from my own interests. But we're talking about what's best in the long term for esports. And what's best in the long term for esports is franchising. No matter which teams are involved, I think there are a lot of things that Riot could do with it that would shoot themselves in the foot. But ultimately, a franchise system is going to be better than a non-franchise system.
And I know people don't. I know a lot of fans are against the franchising because for some reason this is totally bizarre logic to me. By the way, the weirdest argument that they have is that teams will stop trying. Like, somehow in franchise sports, teams don't want to be competitive or be number one. It's not like you don't get more fans and more money and more merchandise sales and more exposure and more ticket sales and everything and better sponsors by being number one. You do. There's still something to play for. Just because you don't get dropped out of the system doesn't mean that being at the bottom doesn't lose you a shit ton of resources, right? So I don't even understand that one at all. That's just such a fucking bizarre argument to me.
I think the best example of what Monty is saying is that, so I was on a panel with the former NBA commissioner, David Stern, and he told me a story about how they created the salary cap in the NBA. And he said in the NBA, the salary cap is not there to protect owners from players. It's there to protect owners from themselves. Because even in a franchise system, owners will spend too much money, spend themselves into bankruptcy in order to try to put together winning teams, right? The people that own sports teams are here not just because, like, we want to make a lot of money, but because this is something we're passionate about and we all really like winning, right? We're not going to try and stop winning.
And especially, fundamentally, too, the players didn't get to where they are, the top 0.0001% or whatever of competitors, by not having an extreme competitive drive. They don't stop wanting to win just because they're at the top level. And even if people start bringing up really weird outliers like the Philadelphia 76ers, the Philadelphia 76ers are still doing what they're doing to win eventually, right? It's just a long-term kind of fucked up strategy, but it's not because they want to suck forever, right? The intention is not to suck forever. The intention is to use the draft lottery system in order to build a long-term viable team.
Yeah. It's way more important for a team to be able to kind of justifiably show their fan base that they care about winning and that there's a path for them to get there than it is for them to win in a given moment, right? Like, I'd say we're on kind of a similar path to the 76ers right now, right? Like, we had a dominant year, then we had a not so good offseason, right?
Interesting analogy.
I'm
volunteered.
That's fine. Look, like, I'm not gonna.
Wait, no, you realize the worse you are, you don't actually get better draft picks right now, right?
It's
you
actually
are aware there is no draft.
Oh no.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think realistically, like, teams that are really strong right now, like Cloud9, like TSM, they can afford to say, hey, we're going to win championships this year. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're building for. And we're going to get the best free agents possible. We're going to do everything it takes to win this year. I know that I, in this offseason, with $1 million in my hand, can't go out there and buy 2 free agents that are going to automatically win us the league, right? There's too much talent there on other teams. There's too much variance. So what I can do is set ourselves up well to win in the long term. I can start developing talent. I can start putting rookies both as starters and as subs on my squad. And I can start building towards that path.
And that's the argument that I really don't understand when people are saying like, well, how do we develop more regional talent? Well, as a team owner, you're scared shitless of putting in rookies in your roster that may end, because every game, every best of 3 in the LCS may be the difference between you hitting relegation or not, right? That means so much. So you can't even say, oh, well, we're going to make our team maybe a little worse this week, but we're going to try out this guy, give him some stage experience, see how he does in an actual competitive match. Like, you never do that. It's such a dangerous move right now. So you can't even say, you can't really farm talent very well because you're always sort of like terrifyingly clinging on to these veterans because they're a known quantity. And even if the upside would be better potentially in a rookie, you can't sacrifice the time to get to.
We've got a really good example here. So there's a guy called Jack here who twice had to pull the high parachute, right? Where he was like, it's not going well. Can you play any other roles? Please just play it in. And here's the thing, right? Even at his best, High wasn't the best jungler in NA LCS, but it meant you didn't get relegated, meant you have a chance to, in the short term, succeed, right? Didn't that help?
Yeah. I mean, it was terrifying to not have High there and to see my team fall apart. And that experience definitely jaded me for making changes to my team. Changes are stifled because of the relegation system. Every time I consider making a change, it's like, my God, that could happen again. And so the current system actually is stifling talent from coming up.
Yeah, and the thing is too is that people are like, I think the average fan doesn't realize how much of a difference there is between playing in solo queue and playing in a professional team. It is basically an entirely different game. Like any team-based esport where you have a solo queue and you have, because everything about it is different. The level of coordination, the discipline, the way you think about the game, the way you play around your teammates, the way you strategize, everything is so much different and deeper at that level. So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to pick up this guy. It's not a plug-and-play scenario, right? You need to slowly introduce those people into that environment to make them good professional players. There have been very few exceptions to this rule, and mostly the exceptions to this rule, guys like Faker, are either A, Faker, or B, came in at a time when teams were less structured than they are right now, so the gap wasn't as large.
Yeah, I think that point is really important. I also think the people that advocate like the relegation model because they think that it helps create talent in Challenger should really... It doesn't create talent in Challenger. And like when teams have a long-term future within a game, they also have a long-term incentive to develop talent over time, even before they're ready for starting rosters, right?
Absolutely.
Like having an academy team right now in LCS makes almost zero sense, right? Like trying to maintain a Challenger academy team when you don't have a long-term future in the game, and especially now, once you can't really promote into LCS and get that one-time cash out, congrats, Jack. Like that makes a lot less sense than in a more stable franchise model, like any traditional sport, where you certainly don't just have your 5 starting athletes. You have an entire bench, an entire development team. You have minor league teams that are your affiliates that you use to help develop your draft picks. Like you have massive systems of talent development and scouting. Because if I'm a team that knows I'm going to be here for 10 years, my concern isn't how do I go out and sign a mid laner that will be worse than Bjergsen. My concern is how do I develop a mid laner that one day when Bjergsen retires or one day when Bjergsen starts dropping off will be the best North American mid laner. Like that is the long-term focus you can take when you aren't worried about relegation.
Exactly, and that will also mostly be used for North American players, right? It will not. You're not going to be importing people into your farm team. Probably, maybe you get.
I actually think you will. I 100%
really.
Think you will. Yes.
Okay.
Like I've thought about
I don't know if you would. Okay, well, go.
Because from my perspective, the biggest difficulty with importing talent is that when you bring them here, they are completely unintegrated into culture, language, structure, any of it, right? Imagine being able to bring over a promising Korean rookie and take 1.5 to 2 years to teach them English, get them comfortable playing with English-speaking teammates, get them comfortable with North American coaching and infrastructure. Like you have someone with the mechanical skills and the mindset of a top Korean player, but doesn't suffer the same type of like assimilation damage that a normal Korean player coming here would.
But my question to you then is, if you're talking about training, a mechanically good player, you're basically isolating the value of Korean imports into like Korean culture or mindset? You're saying that's what makes them great, because in theory, if you had a mechanically strong NA player, couldn't you just do the same thing with less hurdles by making them better? Like what, like if you're talking about a Korean rookie, what is the difference at that point in time between a Korean and an NA rookie to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say theoretically, right? I'm not drawing a hard and fast line saying I will try and develop.
No, I'm just saying like what's the difference at that?
I mean, in this theoretical scenario in which a Korean, it's kind of like what Jack was talking about with contracts, right? Like if we're going to develop a farm team, we're going to try and develop the best players available. And if one of those players happens to be Korean because they have better mechanics or better mindset than a North American player, not because they are Korean, because that would be vaguely racist, but because they just happen to have those as a person, I see no reason why, given the longer development time span, that wouldn't be someone you would want to put resources into.
Okay, I have a general topic. It's kind of like as a way to close some of this out, which is I wanted to know, obviously, you framed most of the discussion, Noah, in terms of just what would help the NA ecosystem, and then in theory, Europe as well, if it's some kind of an analog in any sense. But what would the effect be if only NA LCS was franchised and every other league in the world remains how it is? Is there any significant conclusion you could draw? Like, would you care in that sense as long as NA LCS does well?
I don't know how much a global fan base impacts a North American fan base. I'd say what would likely happen is kind of what I predict to happen in North America, which is not a massive, but a moderate flight of talent to North America, as North America is able to generate more resources than other regions and also has the incentives to develop talent over a longer time span. I'll be clear that I don't necessarily think that happens to the top tier Korean or European players, but I do think that rookies who are skilled but unable to get a starting slot on EU LCS or LCK teams might choose to come to North American sub teams or sister teams in order to develop themselves.
So when the franchise model happens, you see the NA teams making so much more money that now they can actually become potentially the number one spot for people to go who are imports.
I honestly think that has already happened for almost all players. I think there are very few Korean players left that, A, when given an equivalent offer between China and North America, would prefer to go to China. And B, I think North American offers are a hell of a lot closer to Chinese offers than they used to be.
Okay.
For the top.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And like you said, because of the lessening impact of the streaming platforms helping to basically subsidize the salaries of these Korean players through the Chinese teams, and then also the investment in North America. I think North America may have higher offers now, depending on the player.
Depending on the player, but yeah, it's close for sure. It's close.
Okay.
I mean, you just saw Looper leave China.
What would the impact be on the global scene if NA was just the one that was franchised? So if this was the laboratory, as it were.
It's interesting. I think it would definitely be better for fans here in North America, and I think that we could potentially see players shift over from Europe to North America because there's more stability here, and I don't know how long this is going to last. Is it a 1 year head start? Is it forever? But if it's a long term, only franchising in North America, I think we would start seeing fans move over to North America because of the stability that you'd be seeing in the teams being present, where there's still like a rotation and relegation system in Europe. I don't know how it would really impact Korea and China. I think generally we would see more money coming into the North American teams, though, because of the stability. The sponsors would be more interested in working with the North American team, so more money would be coming into the North American team. So that money would naturally flow out to the players. So the benefits and the pay would be getting stronger and stronger as we see more sponsors getting in behind these teams. So it would become a bigger and a bigger advantage for North America, in my opinion.
Not just about player pay either, right? It's about what do your team houses look like, right? Yeah. How big are your coaching infrastructures? What do you do for players? You don't just stick them in a team house. It's quality of life.
And what kind of infrastructure can you build up as well? Because, I mean, you guys rent your team houses or whatever right now, but if you had a long-term guarantee of being in the league, would your investors perhaps build you a team facility like some of the ones that we've seen in China?
you're going to see some cool things coming from Immortals.
Yeah. There is no doubt that Cloud9, Immortals, TSM, all the teams would be looking to build really comprehensive facilities for our players.
I mean, I'll just say this now because it doesn't really matter. But one idea that I was kicking around with Renegades back in the day was to basically purchase like a motel effectively, and then use an old motel, renovate it, and then turn it into, every player gets their own room, and that way you'd have a communal kitchen and everything like that to cook food for like 5 or 6 teams of different esports players and allow them to live in the same environment. You could better control their exercise, build out facilities based around that. And it actually wasn't too expensive to purchase, a 50-room sort of motel in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
I mean, the future of what a North American practice facility looks like is that it looks like a college campus, right?
Yes.
You have cafeteria.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is obviously this was like a year and a half ago when I was looking at these options, but this is that would have been a very primitive sort of first step towards that, but definitely with more longevity. And especially, again, this goes back to the geolocation thing. If you have the geolocated teams, it becomes much easier to rationalize building a facility within that area.
Also having multiple teams under the same roof, which almost nobody does, but I think is super important. And I don't know.
I actually think it's a good idea because that way, the main benefit that I see is a social benefit for the players, because everybody is a pro player, but you can also go hang out with guys from the other team who you're not working with 10 hours a day, or you might be mad at or frustrated with that day. You can still have somebody who has a similar mindset and interest in professional gaming, and you can share best practices between the teams and everything like that.
And content creation is way easier because everyone's in the same spot. You can share coaching resources across multiple teams. You can cross-pollinate so that there's the biggest problem with esports orgs right now, I think, from a culture and competitive perspective, is there is no organizational culture. In Cloud9, you have a Cloud9 CSGO culture and a Cloud9 League of Legends culture, and a Cloud9 Overwatch culture. There's no organizational culture that permeates across every single player and every single team within your organization, and that's a massive problem. And it's a massive problem not right now. It's a massive problem a year or 2 years from now, and nobody is dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been moving different teams into Santa Monica to try to build that culture. So my Overwatch team is not even a mile away from my LCS team. My Counter-Strike team, I would love to see come to Santa Monica soon. That's something I'm looking to do. And so there's a ton of benefits from being able to build that company culture in one location together, and then take advantage of having a team sports psychologist, a team doctor, a chef who's preparing meals that are healthy for all the players, having personal trainers that can work with your players. The general health end of the team would definitely be getting improved.
Yeah. It's hard to make players do it, right? My Counter-Strike team lives less than an hour drive from my League of Legends team. It's been a year since we signed the Counter-Strike team. They've still never met each other.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, it's hard. Competition is hard. That's why I want them all kind of living and working in the same place. Not living and working in the same building, because I do think in the long term that's unhealthy. But living in an apartment and walking 5 to 10 minutes to your college campus team facility.
Yeah.
Right.
And that happens when you have enough stability to invest $500,000 in building out a facility. That doesn't happen when you can be relegated tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, let me ask this question. I mean, this might sound like a very naive question in that sense, but one thing that I have always been puzzled about in League of Legends is that the numbers were huge in League of Legends years ago, and yet you hear about these other esports and hear about some of the top CSGO teams and some of the amounts of money that are being invested. Is this the central thing that's held League of Legends back from being able to get that extra amount?
I don't know. Throw anything that you think about rationality in modern day esports investment a lot of the time out the window, right? There's no rational argument for why North should make as much money as I think they do, right?
Yeah.
There's not a rational the only rational argument is predicting massive growth in the Counter-Strike scene. Sure. It's not justified. Well, very few things in esports are justified based on current day financials, right? Everyone here thinks that esports will be bigger, so the value of current things in esports is greater than the value they currently generate, and that's not inherently bad.
Sure.
You intend to lose money now so you can build up a brand and therefore be an attractive location for future franchising, or for, let's say a new game comes out, and even if it's not franchised, well, if players in the new scene, say like Overwatch, when they came in, I'm sure a lot of those players wanted to come and play for Cloud9 because they know Cloud9 from CSGO and they know Cloud9 from League of Legends. It makes it so much easier to sort of snowball that advantage into better and better teams across all esports titles the more famous you get. So you do lose money now in the hope that in the future this gets big enough to really be like a big moneymaker.
Yeah. I also, Duncan, I don't know what you think League of Legends players get paid nowadays, but even in North America, a lot of League of Legends players make a hell of a lot more than the best CSGO players in the world.
Yeah, there's
no, but I mean, when we talk about the investment into teams, though, the amounts, when you consider like the scene isn't the same at all in any way.
I mean, I don't really know what you mean. League of Legends teams are like, if you have an LCS slot, your organization is worth so much more than a team that doesn't have an LCS slot. Yep. It's not even close to comparable.
I think a lot of the investing that's happening right now, is really based on the speculative hope that we see Overwatch franchises and LCS franchises happen. And so a lot of that value is in having a strong LCS team or participating in LCS or being a part of Overwatch, and a lot less so in Counter-Strike, where there isn't a path at all for franchising.
Well, and I think one of the attractive aspects of the Overwatch League, beyond what's attractive about it already, is that with geolocation, Blizzard is effectively going to be dictating the geolocation possibly for future esports and not only Overwatch. For example, if Overwatch League does well and you have a Chicago-based team and another developer wants to start another big esport, let's say, Amazon's obviously been pushing hard with Breakaway, and they've got this entire game studio, and they want to do franchising as well. Well, if you already exist with a Chicago fan base and you are the big esports team of Chicago, you're going to have a hell of a lot easier time just saying, like, give us Chicago, and you're just going to keep doing that. So in a way, I think what's kind of fascinating is that by geolocating, Blizzard may actually be influencing teams not only in Overwatch, but the same teams or the same owners in multiple esports in the future. It could easily go that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in Counter-Strike, the investments are maybe more public, right? Like you have Refresh, you have, I guess, all of these European football clubs getting into owning teams and starting their own brands. The investments that have happened so far in Counter-Strike are peanuts to the existing and future investments coming for both Overwatch League and for LCS. It's not even close to comparable. Like, Counter-Strike is great. I love Counter-Strike. I love participating in Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike doesn't even come close to having the kind of long-term sustainable structure that LCS and that.
If there is
Overwatch
no
League
franchising in League of Legends, though, and Overwatch League doesn't just immediately tank and fail, will it be outstripped by Overwatch League then?
I think what what will happen is the investment will basically start going away. Yeah. If we don't see, because what the franchise potentially brings to these teams is access to the media rights, which really pushes a lot of the money around in traditional sports, and a lot of these guys want to see that accessible in esports. And if the franchise model doesn't come along and the media rights don't come along with it, the investment dollars are going to go away, at least in North America.
And to be clear, that doesn't mean that every team's going to drop their League of Legends team, but it does mean that teams are going to be probably spending a lot closer to the amount of money they actually make on their LCS team instead of kind of overspending on the future.
And also, I think that as you see that, like, those sort of numbers going down, there's going to be a lot more hype around the franchise league from the owners who control these big fan bases, and you'll see more money moving into the Overwatch League, which is why I think actually the competition between Riot and Blizzard, between franchising of the LCS in North America and the development of the Overwatch League, is going to be crucial, because I think they're actually going to push each other to get better and offer more things to the team owners and sort of spread out the power and control, not only that was very centralized within Riot, to the team owners, and we'll start to see more equitable dealings overall. Because there is the problem is that if you have all this money and you're in NA, you only had the LCS to go to previously if you wanted that level of visibility and that level of continuous structure, as opposed to the more sort of freewheeling Counter-Strike circuit where it's a different event in every country every weekend, right? And now with the development of the Overwatch League, there is a competitor that is guaranteeing franchising from day one. So they're already offering things that Riot doesn't offer. So now that there's some sort of alternative, Riot's going to have to step up its game.
Okay, right. Sooner or later, I do have to go to sleep in my life. So let's get some final statements from people.
Don't lie to us, Duncan.
Do you have any final statement on this topic, or just to close out the show and the things we discussed, Jack?
I think what Monty's point is super interesting, that Blizzard and Riot could be pushing each other to make better and better franchises and making the system better and better for the teams and for the players. I think it's pretty exciting. I'm super excited by what Activision Blizzard has been doing with the Overwatch League, and I'm really grateful that how hands-on they've been with esports, that they actually recognize the value of esports and what we bring to gaming. So and I don't know, I'm very excited for the future. I don't see like dark days ahead and franchising not happening. I believe it's inevitable, and I think that this is going to be a next evolutionary step for esports as we move into franchising. I'm super excited to see it happen.
Okay, Monty.
I'm just hoping that this clarified some positions that I've seen on the internet about people freaking out about franchising, like all of a sudden it's going to be the death of competition. There's a lot to like about franchising, and even though I think it is true that a lot of the games among the lower tier teams towards the end of the seasons are not going to be as exciting as they would be under the relegation system, the net positives of having the ability to develop a deeper talent pool and stability within the league and stability for the teams and the sponsors is going to mean that the teams are going to be able to have more money, to make better content, to create better players, to be more competitive internationally, and the players are going to get paid more money. So I think it's worth the sacrifice.
Noah?
I just think it's incredibly exciting to be where we are right now in esports. Like, I actually feel on a daily basis like we're staring at the birth of the NFL or the NBA, right? The next 6 to 8 months is going to determine what the next 10 to 20 years of esports look like, for good or worse. So we're super excited at Immortals, and I personally am super excited about what the future holds, whether that, and how long it lasts for, how big it gets. Like, this is a rapidly changing ecosystem. It's incredibly exciting to be involved in. I'm sure it's also really exciting to watch from the perspective of a fan. We're looking forward to the structures being in place that better allow us to kind of build for the long term and build for sustainability, and hopefully all of us in this call will be there for that.
I'm Kelsey Moser from Yahoo Esports, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.